Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Ad Hoc Scrutiny Panel. The first item on the agenda today is to appoint a chair. Can I ask if there are any nominations for the post of chair, please?
Could I nominate Councillor Smage, please?
Yes, thank you. Can I ask our members agreeable to the nomination of Councillor Smage as chair, please?
Yes, I second that, yes.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to you now, Councillor Smage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Right, so any interests that any members wish to declare? No? Okay, thank you. So at the meeting today, the ad hoc scrutiny panel for residential housing stock health and safety compliance. This is our first public meeting. I just wondered if the panel members would like to introduce themselves. We have apologies from Councillor Anthony Smith, who will be here next time. And we've two co-optees as well to the panel. So Councillor Lee Richards, do you want to introduce yourself first, please?
Good afternoon, Councillor Lee Richards from the Newsom ward.
Thank you. Councillor Pinnock, are you okay to... You're just getting set up there. Are you okay to introduce yourself?
Apologies for all the moving around. So Councillor Amanda Pinnock, I'm a councillor in the Ashbrow ward.
Thank you. Linda?
Yes, hello, I'm Linda Summers. I'm a co-optee on the panel.
Thank you. And Kevin?
Hello there, my name is Kevin McAllister and I'm a co-optee on the panel.
Thank you very much. And I'm Councillor Liz Smage. Right, okay, so item 3, admission of the public. All items are
Councillor Smage, sorry to disturb you, but Councillor Uppal.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Uppal. Sorry, it's because I can't see your picture. Councillor Uppal.
No, that's okay. I'm Councillor Harpreet Uppal, so I'm observing as the chair of the Economies and Neighbourhood Scrutiny Panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, okay, so all items are in public today. And item 4, deputations and petitions, we have no deputations or petitions received. And item 5, we've no public questions that have been received at this time. Item 6 is the terms of reference. These are on page 1 of our meeting papers, and these were as agreed by the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee, and they're just here for noting so that we ensure that we follow our terms of reference. Okay. Yeah, anybody got any questions for that, or I'm okay to move on? All right, okay. Right then, so we move to item 7 then, this is a summary of relevant compliance and building safety regulation and the council's response. And in relation to compliance, we're talking fire safety, asbestos management, gas and electrical safety, water hygiene and lift safety. And we have 3 officers here to give the update. I wonder if you could introduce yourselves first of all, so people know which areas you cover. So Naz, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Smage. I'm Naz Parker. I'm the Director of Homes and Neighbourhoods with the overall responsibility for council housing stock and services.
Thank you. Assad?
Hi, good afternoon, members of the panel. My name is Assad Bhatti. I'm Head of Building Safety, responsible for all aspects of building safety and compliance.
Eric?
Good afternoon, everybody. Eric Hughes, Head of Assurance and Transformation for Homes and Neighbourhoods, so look after the policy and procedural side of things.
Okay, thank you. Right then, so I think you're going to go through a little bit of this, aren't you? Bearing in mind that we will have read your report, and bearing in mind as well that I have I don't know about anybody else, but I have a lot of writing on my report as well, so I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions from people. Okay, if members of the panel, if you wish to ask questions, can you use the raise hands function, please? Okay, thank you. So Naz, are you starting?
No, Assad's going to lead out on this one, I think. Is it?
Right.
Is it you, Assad, or is it Eric?
It's me, yeah, this one's me. Both of them are me, I think the next one's me as well. So Chair, if it's okay, I'm going to share my screen because I've highlighted some sections. I've assumed that the panel has read the report and therefore I'm just going to go through some key areas that I feel are relevant and that we'd like to talk about in particular, that are particular relevance to our current position, the approach to building safety and compliance in particular. So in terms of summary on the report, we have a current framework that places a duty on building owners to effectively manage risks across all multiple occupancy buildings and in do so listen and act on the issues, concerns raised by residents. We've been working extremely hard to establish the current arrangements that are detailed in the table below and in response to reform, and we continue to develop the approach through collective effort and a fair amount of partnership working. So the following table summarises, in our view, those key relevant regulatory requirements and regulations and legislation that govern our approach and an assessment against where we are against each one of those requirements in particular. So I'd like to start with the white paper on social housing and in particular the requirement to keep residents safe in homes and what we're doing to ensure that residents remain safe. We've got a major commitment, organisational commitment in terms of ongoing investment in housing and in particular remediation of housing, in particular around fire and asbestos. So those programmes are up and running. I'll go into more detail about those programmes. We continue to provide mitigation measures to high-rise blocks. We've maintained those measures since December 2020 and continue to do so and will do so until we actually remediate the high-rise blocks. That includes patrolling watch, daily fire checks, full evacuation protocols. We have an arrangement with West Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service in terms of a response and an urgency response and a rescue plan should it be required. We're doing a lot of work around our communications with residents and leaseholders and how we present our information. I think there's a fair amount of work to do, but we recognise the importance of the golden thread of information and maintaining that consistency of providing that information and doing it in such a way that's clear and concise and making sure that the information that we do provide is current and it's accurate and it's reliable. What I mean by that is the way we publish FRAs and the way that we will shortly start to develop a building safety case for each block in multiple occupancy and therein provide assurance to residents and leaseholders that we have programmes underway and progress against those programmes. We've got lots of work going on in terms of assessing our blocks, in terms of the building fabric and the structure. We've just concluded the work on the high-rise blocks, which has led to a cabinet approval to do some major regeneration and remediation to those blocks. We're now looking at 6-storey blocks. I expect to receive reports in October. We're taking the exact same approach, so irrespective of height, we're doing the same level of detailed investigation to 6-storey blocks. We'll be following that on with retirement living schemes, and then we'll continue to do the review of all low-rise blocks, i.e. 774 blocks. But the important thing to remember is that we're not diluting the approach from the approach used on the high-rise blocks. So it's a detailed investigation into the building, the fabric, the structure, and those installations that do present a risk. Those will form an improvement plan, a capital improvement plan, I have no doubt. We're talking about the next stage of that at the moment, i.e. the 6-storey blocks, and a programme which we expect to launch in 2022 around remediation of those blocks. In particular, the removal of flammable EWI to the external fabric and major improvements to the layouts of those blocks to prevent risk in the event of escaping a fire in particular. We've got a new building safety function that we are currently building. I'm now in post as of the 1st of September. I'm now building a team around that new approach, which has been approved by ET and NAS. I've got the full support of the organisation, so that's underway. So that's in terms of keeping residents safe in the home. So I'm going to move on then in terms of dealing with complaints. So whilst we have 95.6% of complaints that are resolved at the first stage of the process, it is good performance, but there are opportunities to improve complaints handling. We've therefore commissioned HQN to carry out a complaints review and identify for us areas where we can improve our complaints handling process. To have your voice heard by your landlord, again, that's one of the key points of the white paper. So some of the things that we're doing, we've reviewed and updated our governance structure. We've got an advisory board with 5 tenant leaseholder representatives on there. We have a building safety and assurance board. We have a tenant advisory group, grants panel. We've got clearly defined routes to raise and escalate tenant concerns and suggestions should we have to do so. We've completed a self-assessment against the Housing Ombudsman code, and which we've followed and commissioned a complaints review. We've continued to support a range of engagement mechanisms, and at the moment, I can tell members of the panel that we've engaged 3,010 people in various consultation events, in addition to the representatives that sit on our panels. So moving on to the Building Safety Bill, this is 2020. It hasn't been enacted yet. It's due to be enacted in 2022. We're being told now, but again, that may change. We're not too sure. So what does that mean for residents and homeowners? I've broken this down into kind of into 3 distinct areas. So it means for residents and homeowners that we're in the process of recruiting building safety managers. That's a key approach for us. Those building safety managers will be appointed to act as liaison and as the kind of key point of contact to keep residents assured of all the various activities to those blocks. We haven't decided how many managers we're going to recruit in total yet, but we're looking at around 6. And we haven't agreed the allocation of blocks, but we've just agreed the grading for those posts, and we're actually out to adverts in the next 2 weeks. We've appointed a fire safety engagement team. We've appointed fire safety champions to high-risk residential blocks made up of residents. We've detailed a 6-month. We've completed a detailed 6-month resident consultation for the high-rise blocks, Buxton House, Berry Brow, and Harold Wilson Court, and we've listened to the concerns raised by residents, and that's been a major factor. And again, that's the kind of golden thread of our approach. That whatever we do, it resonates to the tenant's voice, and we demonstrate that, continue to demonstrate that. So what does the Building Safety Bill mean for building owners? So we're not looking to build any buildings that are going to fall into scope, luckily, but we are actively applying the principles of any regeneration and refurbishment to existing buildings in preparation to maintain those building safety cases. As I said earlier, we've got information now for our high-rise blocks. We're now pulling information together for our 6-storey blocks and then our 19 retirement living schemes. So we'll follow the approaches that are laid out under the reform about the various building safety gateways. So we're going to use BIM modelling, for example, to record and maintain our data so that we've got accurate records, it's accessible. We're not going to use BIM in all cases because it's not possible on existing buildings, but where we can, we'll use the principles of archiving data, updating drawings so that we have an accurate register of all of our buildings, existing buildings and the layouts, because that will obviously allow us to re-inspect our buildings accurately and in a timely manner as well. So what does it mean for the built environment? Well, again, we're not building, but we are constantly in touch with our suppliers and manufacturers, and obviously we're in touch with the kind of changes to building materials and the reforms around that. But as I say, that's quite light touch because we're not building that many buildings that fall into scope. In terms of the Fire Safety Act, that's the next major piece of legislation. It amends the Fire Safety Order 2005, and it has the intention to improve fire safety in multi-occupancy dwellings. And again, it's due to come into force during 2021, but we're not quite sure when. We haven't got an accurate date on it. The key aspects of the Fire Safety Act in particular are to ensure that we've got suitable and sufficient approach to carrying out fire risk assessments. And it goes beyond the existing fire risk assessments, and in particular, we have to identify risks that affect the structure and external walls of the building and individual door openings and common parts of the building. So what we've done is we've reviewed our risk assessment approach, we've spoken to our suppliers and our surveying contractors, and we've redesigned the risk assessments that we carry out, the FRA risk assessments. So we've carried out, but on top of that, we've also carried out a number of detailed investigations, as I've touched on, with high-rise blocks, and continue to do so. So we're going to do the Type 1 FRAs. We'll continue to deliver the Type 1 FRA programme, but using the new approach. So we'll factor into the Type 1 FRA the structure and the fabric of the building. But also we'll have a lot of additional data that we've commissioned through the ongoing work that AHR are doing for us around the fire engineering surveys. So we're in a pretty good position in response to the Fire Safety Act. And then finally, the consolidated guidance note dated, or the advice note, as some people call it, dated January 2020. It factors in risks associated to ACM cladding, but also flammable constituents in our building fabric, in particular EWI. I think the takeaway from that, that I always take away and mention to my team, is that irrespective of height, the expert panel from the guidance note suggests that all building owners should assess all of their buildings irrespective of height to identify the risks associated to fire. So again, it's just replaying some of the points I mentioned earlier, but we've carried out an assessment of all the high-rise blocks. We don't have any ACMs, we don't have any high pressure laminate cladding on any of our buildings, so we're safe in that respect. We've responded to the discovery of flammable insulation to the high-rise blocks. We've now got a programme in place. We are about to place orders to remediate Harold Wilson Court, and the plans around Buxton House and Berry Brow are well underway. The project team's been established, and colleagues are working to develop a programme to carry out those major improvements of those blocks. As I say, I'm due to receive the assessments on 6-storey blocks in October, after which we will start pulling together a programme, and a recommendation will go to Cabinet in respect to those blocks, and then we'll follow on with the low-rise blocks as well. That's the kind of highlights that I wanted to touch on, Chair. I'll take any questions.
Okay, thank you. All right, could you unshare your screen, please, so I can, thank you, so I can see everybody's faces. Thank you. Right, before we kick off with questions, I just got one actually that I just would like clarification on, please. Are you talking 6-storey blocks of flats? Do we have any 5-storey blocks of flats?
I'm not aware of any 5-storey. We have 3, and I think we have 3-storey. We have 4-storey. Not sure we have any 5-storey.
Right. Okay. It's okay. So you've got 4-storey. We definitely got 3-storey. I know, yeah. But you say you've got 4-storey as well. Okay. So so presumably what you're going to do is, once you've done the 6-storey blocks in October, you're going to go to all other.
So we're going to do the
retirement living.
Yeah, so we're going to do retirement living next, Councillor Smage, after we've done the 6-storey. So we've got the 6-storey done. We're just writing up the reports and the recommendations. Right. The guys in the background are working on the retirement living schemes at the moment. So that batch of reports will come next. The reason we've put that to the back of the queue is because all those buildings have fire suppression in them already. So there's less of a risk when you compare them to the high-rise blocks and the 6-storey blocks. So we do have some good line of defence there. But then we're going to move on to the big piece of work, which is the remaining 774 blocks, all with a communal access and an egress, and we'll be assessing those blocks as well, using the same approach.
Okay, so I'll open to questions. Does any from the panel have any questions that they wish to ask on this item? Kevin.
Thanks for the report, Assad. I think it sets out the wide variety of work that you're doing across a lot of different work streams. Just with regard to the white paper, be safe in your home with particular, the paper does recommend, although it's not legal requirement as yet, and it's still out for, there was consultation on both smoke detection and carbon monoxide detection, and also on electrical safety. So with regards to both of those, bringing the requirements for council housing in line with the private sector. I couldn't see that that listed in your description. I just wondered, is that because you've concentrated on that's not currently required yet?
Well, I think it's what we're doing, Kevin, is we're looking at blocks as you'd expect first, but we're also taking a paper to SMT in November with regards introduction of carbon monoxide detectors to all housing. So at the moment we've got them in buildings where we've got solid fuel appliances only, because that's the legal requirement. But we did discuss this a couple of years ago, and we said, well, we'll see where the legislation goes. We're going to hold back at the moment because we recognise the nuance factor, the nuisance factor as well. We trialled them elsewhere, and there's a lot of nuisance factor involved with carbon monoxide detection and false alerts and so on and so forth. So we're now firm of the opinion that we need to introduce them. It applies to the private sector, so why wouldn't it apply to us? This report focuses on blocks in particular, not residential domestic dwellings, but there is a plan to introduce domestic carbon monoxide detectors across domestic dwellings, because we mainly have gas in domestic dwellings and not across a lot of the blocks. But where we do have,
it's important to say we don't have the plan yet. We need to agree our approach and then put a plan and a programme against that.
Yeah, so we're taking the paper in November, and that sets out the plan.
Is that the same with the electrical testing on a 5-yearly basis as well?
We have the electrical testing already in place. The 5-year test regime is underway. It's been underway for 3 years. We've got around 600 properties, if I remember rightly, that are currently out of test because of no access. We're trying to use the EPA process, Kevin, but as you know, there's no precedence at the moment to be able to use that to force injunction or entry. So we're trying to lobby local magistrates and trying to get some precedence wherever possible to use that approach, as we do as with the LGSR approaches. So the 5-year programme is well underway.
Okay, that I only ask because it is referenced in the white paper, and I just couldn't see it within you've put a lot of content in there, so thank you for that.
Councillor Lee Richards.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, the Housing Quality Network for the complaints, are they a private company?
They're an independent consultancy that's kind of widely known and highly regarded in the sector as being adding value in this space. We wanted it to be independent because we wanted to get a view that, took an objective assessment of where we are with less so the policy, but more so the handling of complaints, because we do have a concern that we could get better at doing that. And actually, the draft report kind of bears some of that out for us. So we're now just busy working through that first draft report to get to a concluded report so that we can put an improvement plan alongside. We don't want a separate improvement plan. It's much more about our journey to excellence and transforming the relationship with our tenants.
Right, thank you. And could I just follow up with you? Talked about golden thread of providing assurance to residents.
Yeah.
Can I ask how many vacancies there are, staff vacancies, housing officers, etc., in the high-rise blocks?
Sorry, Councillor, could you just qualify that question, please?
Sorry, I've heard that quite a few members of staff have staff turnover has been quite high, and I just wondered, giving assurance to residents, how many vacancies there were in sort of housing officers, etc.
I'm not aware of any significant vacancy gaps other than the usual vacancy management rate that we deal with. So I've not seen an uptick in the housing officer cohort. It's true to say that we have a lot of new housing officers, but that's over a period. Some of whom are inexperienced. The pandemic has meant that they haven't fully introduced themselves to tenants in the neighbourhoods that they are working. But we're now getting much more visible and trying to do that. We also are now going to prepare to make sure that we communicate with tenants who their housing officer is, as well as with your good selves, of course, as ward members. So it's a piece of work that is in train. We've recognised that some of that connection in the relationship has gone into disrepair, and that we need to re-engage and strengthen that.
Okay, thank you.
I should also say that we are strengthening the housing officer capacity and getting them additional support at team leader level as well.
Okay.
Chair, could I just add to that as well?
Yeah.
I think it's in the paper as well, Councillor Richards, but we've also appointed a high-rise engagement team, so they're fully in post now, and we are recruiting to fire safety champions for all blocks. So that hopefully strengthens and maintains that communication channel at all times. And the building safety manager, as I say, that's a key post, and that's going to start under recruitment shortly. That pulls it all together.
On a high rise, what we've done is we've created a bespoke multidisciplinary team to respond to any of the queries that come from the tenants on those. It's still in its final forming stages and embedding itself, but we did that as a result of the findings at Christmas around external wall cladding.
Right. And just sorry, finally, just the
Yes, okay.
are you finding that you're getting plenty of people interested to be the fire safety champions?
I think the feedback from the team is that it's very positive. We've had some good response. I can't say how many people we've appointed yet, Councillor Richards, but I know we've had a positive feedback and engagement with residents on a number of blocks. We'll bring that back to the next meeting.
Thank you very much.
Okay, can I just ask some questions that maybe is me not understanding, but there we go. Right, okay, so under item 1 white paper on social housing, you've said refresh compliance communications plan, digital and on-site information. How are you doing that, especially if you've got some vacancies as well? How are you making sure that your digital and on-site information relating to compliance arrangements is up to date at all times? You also say ongoing major review of low-rise blocks through dynamic risk assessments. What are and how do you do dynamic risk assessments, please? And the establishment of the new building safety function, is that in place? And if not, when will it be? And you've also saying about information to tenants through your annual report published on the services website. What happens if people are not on digital? Okay, thank you.
I'll take the comms question first then. We're doing a lot of work, Councillor Smage, in terms of understanding how we present our information. The focus is around publishing fire risk assessments for blocks, which we already do. But we are also working on a lot of informational videos at the moment, so that it explains what we do and why we do it, and where the regulatory requirement is. So that's underway. We've launched the video, the informational animation for gas servicing, and we're now putting together the informational video or animation for fire risk assessments. We feel that will give us the ability to be able to communicate wider with our residents and explain, rather than somebody sitting there and explaining it. We feel that the animation will go a lot further in explaining why we need to do something, because we recognise that the success of our programme is based on the success of working with residents, and in particular getting access to all parts of the building to do inspections, re-inspections, and carry out repairs and remediation. So we're effectively revamping the website. We are going to set up a dedicated building safety page, which contains all of the relevant background information, the explanation of the legislation, and what part we play in that, and the residents' obligations, the leaseholders' obligations, and our obligations. So we're doing a full refresh of everything. We recognise that the information on there is not very clear. It's quite confusing in terms of where you need to go for certain things. So we need to make sure that we get a dedicated area for all that information. So that's the communications plan, but it's in progress at the moment. We're focusing on that now because we have the resource to be able to do so. We're working alongside colleagues. We are in the process of revamping notice boards in all blocks, because we're mindful of the switchover and the transition from the Almo to the council as well. So the branding needs to be updated as well. But by doing so as well, we're also looking at the notices that we put on there. So it's a complete programme. We are pulling together that into a communications plan. which we will be able to share at some point in the very near future in terms of what that looks like and the kind of key stages that we're going through. But it is work in progress.
Okay, so what about the rest then?
On building safety compliance team, Councillor Smage, it's true to say that we now have all the approvals in place. We've done some grading of some job roles, and so as Asad said, we've established the head of building safety role, and Asad is appointed in that. We've just appointed a temporary fire safety lead for a 12-month period whilst we work up the permanent recruitment strategy. We've also put in we're in the recruitment process for a project officer on asbestos.
Water and fire. Yes, water and fire.
As well as asbestos.
Yeah, so fire, water and asbestos.
Yeah. We've just got back from grading panel the building safety manager role. In the first instance, we're going to advertise for 2 because we're not entirely sure how the legislation will pan out and how many high-rise buildings we will continue to manage in the future. So we've got approval for 6 in total, but we'll secure compliance people with the technical capability we need them to. Is like gold dust at the moment, so everybody's competing for the same people. So recruitment has been challenging. The fire safety lead that I just referred to took us 3 attempts to get in place. So I'm sort of saying March of next year because of those challenges we have in the recruitment space.
Okay,
but don't forget
what about
also
the dynamic risk assessments?
I'll get Asad to change that. But the only thing I'd want to say is we have an existing compliance team that has transferred across into the building safety team as well. So the new roles are strengthening the capacity.
All right, I'm just mindful of time. So dynamic risk assessments, please.
So this is a model that we adopt, Councillor Smage, and what it does is it allows us to update the assessment at any point and factor in changes. So we don't just do a risk assessment and lock it down. It leaves it open, but we factor in a number of considerations, not just the building fabric, but the occupation. So if the occupation of building changes, we receive information from colleagues in housing. So for example, if we have people with a more vulnerability, more support need, then we can factor that into the risk assessment. That's why it's dynamic. We don't just do it and lock it down. It continues to evolve and we continue to review it based on any changes of information and circumstance.
Okay, so it's not a case of you do a risk assessment for one type of building on one building and apply it to all those types of building. You do a risk assessment
each one has its own.
and every. Right, okay. Kevin, you wanted to come in.
And it's on a matrix.
Yeah, Kevin.
Thanks, Councillor Smage. Just very brief, the final point from me. Just in the context of the next paper, you've got 61 actions in terms of the audit compliance review. All these items that we're looking at here are new requirements that sit outside those, with a very large volume of additional work for you, a lot of different areas. I was wondering how, in terms of this paper and these actions identified here, how you're going to give assurance to councillors going forward that all of these are being delivered against.
Sorry, Kevin, could you just say, are you saying you want assurance on these actions in this paper? Or the
I was just saying the terms of reference is ongoing statutory compliance, isn't it? And ensuring residents are safe. This forms part of that in my mind. All these actions here, and I was just wondering, are you intending to bring this back at a later date with a fresh self-assessment, or?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an iterative process, isn't it? We continue to improve. That's the whole point of compliance, that we have an improvement plan. Some of it's led through the compliance review, which we'll talk about next. And of the 61 actions, I think we've completed around 40. So we're well on the way to completing those actions for that review. Some of them cross over to the actions that we've got here, but generally they all feed into an improvement plan.
So none of the actions identified as a response to the white paper are missed out in the overall compliance review. They're one and the same thing. The improvement plan picks up the white paper, the Building Safety Bill, the Fire Safety Act, and the improvement plan that we have, that's the next item, is very much about responding to all of that. So when we initiated the compliance review, all of that policy environment was already present. So we fed that in and built it into the actions that get us to compliance.
Okay, right, thank you.
Okay, so have I read this right, that all of these actions on this first paper are are needed as enablers to carry out all actions. So these actions have to be part of your action plan just as much as your other risks actions as well, because without these you can't do the things on the next paper. Is that what you're saying to us? Is that in answer to Kevin's point, or have I got that wrong?
No, what we're saying is that on these, this is the current status that we're at in terms of response to the regulatory requirement. In addition to that, we've done a detailed compliance review, which picks up not just response to regulatory requirement, but operational improvements that are required. So data management, governance, resource capacity, and the next paper goes into more detail about those. This is our assessment against regulation at the moment, and we wanted to provide an evidence of where we're at against those regulations.
Okay, all right.
That makes sense.
So yeah, so just really quickly for me, because we will need to move on to the next paper, I think. So in your paper, you're saying that you've got 21 million set aside for remediation. Presumably this is for your high-rise blocks only, the 21 million. So what happens if you need remediation in other blocks? Will the HRA be able to cover that remediation as far as you're aware at this moment in time? Naz, is that one for you?
The 21 million asset covers more than the remediation of high rise, because the high rise blocks, we got a budget approved as a separate cabinet approval. Asad, do you want to just detail what's in the 21?
Yeah, so the 21 million includes the low rise blocks and the retirement living blocks. So it's effectively everything that we put in scope. So it's not just the high rise. That is, as Naz said, the high rise are probably accounted for in the capital allocation for regeneration and refurbishment.
Okay, so it's everything in scope at this moment in time.
Yeah, but what we're saying is that we could bring more buildings into scope.
Yeah, that's
as a result of the dynamic assessment.
Yeah, that's
I'd have to recast the business plan at that point, Councillor Smage, so that you know, because it's going to be a question of choices and trade-offs, isn't it, to make it affordable, and you know, compliance becomes the top priority in that trade-off discussion.
Yeah, Linda, you want to come in, Linda?
Yes, please. It's just a quick question, really, just to clarify. I haven't understood properly whether the programme you describe in the first paper is included within or separate to the programme that you're then monitoring in the second paper. So the 61 actions that come through the compliance review and the Mazars audit, are they in addition to the work you outline in this first paper, or do they include this?
So some of them, sorry, Linda, so some of them are probably not being clear. The actions in the compliance review, some of them cross over with the progress that we've made. So, for example, establishing the compliance team, appointing building safety managers, doing work to our IT systems, that crosses over with some of the updates that are provided in the plan, in the update here, in the report here. Sorry, excuse me. Sorry, the kids have just come in from school. So there is a crossover. There's clearly a crossover, but there are two separate items. The review is something that was commissioned by us in response to our position. This represents where we're making progress generally against all of the legislation.
So how do you separately track then the action in this first paper, and how do we then as a scrutiny panel track that?
We've got it all. That's why I've listed it down here in terms of the key actions, so we can start to track them and monitor them. But we're also tracking the actions, the detailed recommendations made by RMS for the compliance review. Some of them will cross over, as I say, some of the actions cross over.
I get that, but clearly some of them weren't. So there is a programme of work, therefore, that sits over and above the compliance compliance review stuff.
So, for example, the compliance review says that we must complete our FRA actions in a timely manner. So the FRA actions are part of our programme of remediation. So if you look at the first item, Linda, major investment in housing, fire, asbestos remediation programmes. So those FRA remediations are included there, but that also includes the wider remediation. So the major remediation to Harold Wilson Court, to Buxton House, that's not detailed in the compliance review. So we've combined, some of those items were detailed in the compliance review, some weren't. But what we've done is we've pulled everything together in terms of what we're doing here and how it relates to the requirements of the key regulations.
Okay, I'm not quite getting it, but I'll move on and we'll come back to it.
Yeah, I'm not quite getting it either, so I think maybe we ought to ask for a bit more discussion on
officers
this.
Officers
yeah.
will do a bit more work
Yeah,
for you
yeah,
just to try and
okay.
align those two, because it's a good
Yeah,
point.
please. Yeah.
And we'll take it away and bring it back in a
Okay,
more kind
so-
of coherent way, in so that you can track it. I get your point about needing to track it in one place.
Thanks, yeah. So agenda item 8 then, I think we've sort of combining the two a little bit here for you. So do you want to just, you want to say anything before we move on to questions? Because again, I've got a lot of biro on my report.
Chair, in the interest of time, would we take the paper as read and take your questions?
Yes, please. Yes. Okay. So Linda, have you got a question for this paper, or was it your last? Yeah, you've got a question. There
it
you
was
go.
my last one, but if I can nip in, I have just got on this one too. It was mainly around the dashboard document, which is clear and helpful, but what I couldn't get from it is any assessment of the relative priority of the actions. So one would hope that it was mainly high priority ones that had been prioritised, but how would we be able to assess progress in terms of relative priority?
Yeah, we can provide that. So we elected not to provide too much detail on the dashboard, but if you look at the report itself, it details the number of recommendations, or the number of overall recommendations, and we can provide that further breakdown if you require, but it is detailed in terms of the report itself. So we have the recommendations listed out, and then we've got a breakdown of those completed recommendations as well. We can give a further detail, Linda, if you like, on the high priority actions, if I can bring that back to the next meeting.
I see the list in the narrative document, but I still can't see that identifies the relative priority of each action.
In many senses, Linda, through you, Chair, the prioritisation of this has been, you'll see it by due to start date. That's how we've prioritised it, by taking the higher risk stuff to start earlier. But it's true to say that actually the compliance review returned quite a lot of high priority, and so it's looking like everything has to go now. And so, to be honest with you, it wasn't really that prudent to say, well, we'll do. So we've just kind of managed a program across the timeline to ensure that we're dealing with the higher risk stuff first, but not losing track of, and kind of in parallel starting other streams of work. So if I remember rightly from the dashboard, that there were only still five actions that were still outstanding to start, but they weren't due to start anyway. So everything that needed to start has started and is in progress at different stages of progress. But there are a much larger number of actions that are being completed, and I guess that's in a dashboard form. Wanted you to give you that assurance that the actions are being ticked off and being completed.
Okay, Kevin.
Mute.
You're on mute, Kevin.
First time for anyone today. Just in terms of that, this is essentially the third line of defence. The audit, the external strategic review is the third line of strategic defence. I was just wondering, in terms of the governance associated with that, we're marking out items as completed. Is that being looked at separately by Eric's team? Is he looking at are the auditors signing that separately, and is that process separate and distinct from the compliance function? Is that held by sort of Eric's section and reviewed independently for the sign off of those actions?
In simple terms, yes. I've just been corresponding with internal auditors today in relation to doing an audit on the compliance work that we've been doing on data cleansing, for example, which is all part of what Assad said has been one of our underlying issues about getting the right data in the right place at the right time. So yes, the third line of defence is using our internal auditors or other sources of
validation outside of the service to give us that extra security. Kevin, Kevin,
and also at the end of the process, we anticipate that we would go back to Mazars and to RMS to say, here are the recommended actions, here was the management response, here's how we believe we've completed it, so that we get a sign off of the overall audit as well at that point. And that's why we're having to refer to Mazars and refer to RMS, because we want to sign off both audits at the appropriate time.
Can I just add as well, Kevin, that each recommendation has it's tracked and it has a formal sign off, and it's signed off by the consultant, and then it's presented to the sponsor for approval. So every recommendation has its own formal sign off, and there's a pro forma against every recommendation. So we can't proceed as complete until that's formally signed off.
Thank you for that. That's answered my question thoroughly, and it does give the confidence that third level of independent checking and balancing is it's part of the strength of the overall system.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That was one of my questions, actually, as to whether you were going to go back to independent review, because if you've got this sort of as your day to day, and you've got all these systems in place and everything, you need that overarching look to help you, don't you?
Absolutely.
To carry that out.
And Chair, it's part of the quality assurance framework we're putting in place for all of these. So we have, identified first, second, and third lines of defence in that quality assurance framework, with timescales against which we will review and report against those.
Okay, so these lines of defence then, can I just get these clear, please? So your first line of defence, establish responsibility line managers, etc. Can you confirm that is in place? And your second line of defence, your operational compliance services, formally agreed policy and process. So have you formally agreed that? And then on page 13 of our papers at 2.08, you say, if executed properly, the plan will provide substantial assurance. Can you please assure us that your plan will be executed properly, please?
I can assure you, Chair, that we will execute this work properly with all the necessary controls and assurances that we need to have around quality, but most importantly, compliance with the regulations.
Okay, and all those things in your different lines of defence, you've got those in place.
Line managers are briefed. Terms of policies and procedures, I think we'll update you as part of the overall plan, but we are working through those, but I wouldn't say we're completed through those.
Right.
Because we're having the alignment with the council's policies at the same time as a consideration.
Yes. Now, you mentioned council's policies, and I wondered if you were revisiting the Kirklees housing strategy document 2018 to 2023, because there are some items in there about risk, etc. And that don't seem to sit with where you are currently. And I just wondered if you were going to be reviewing that council policy as well in the light of all this new regulation that's coming through.
Well, not only regulation, but the policy context has changed in many senses. And now the transfer itself begs the question, is the housing strategy reflective of all the council's activity, which quite honestly the answer is no. And therefore we have initiated a review. We're probably 80% of the way through that, because it's more than just building safety, as you'll appreciate. Councillor Smage is looking at what new supply we want to do and how we want to do that, what the specialist accommodation needs of the district look like. What we're going to do with the allocations policy, a philosophical question, will we continue to manage an open register? Those sorts of things are all being put into that. We're trying to fix the long-standing age designation issue, and so there's quite a whole policy and strategy approach being taken to it, with a more forensic eye to say, okay, so what's the future strategy beyond 21 look like? 23 look like, sorry.
Yes. Yeah, it's just that it definitely does need some changes.
You're absolutely right,
to it.
and,
It definitely
and
does need some
we
changes.
are on with it. Councillor Scott's seen a kind of an
Right.
initial progress
Okay.
report on it.
That's fine. Can we ask as well, because the tenant's voice is key in a lot of this new legislation, it is about hearing the tenant's voice through all of this. So can you let us know, please, how you are hearing that tenant's voice at this moment in time?
So as you'd appreciate, we've done a huge amount of engagement, Councillor Smage, over the course of the last 12 months, both at a kind of a whole tenant level, as well as more specifically around high rise. And we are constantly engaging with our tenants on the high rise because of that high rise team that we've established. And as Ed was just saying, we've just recruited the engagement team in old money, you know, like the old tenant liaison officer on estate regenerations. It's not the same, but it's a very similar principle that we're adopting to working with high rise and making sure the tenant's voice is heard. As you appreciate, at the very top level, we have 5 really high caliber tenant members on the board. It's early days for the board, as you'll appreciate, so there's quite a lot of governance development and board development work we have to do with them. The conversation we've started with tenant board members is what areas of interest do you want to have, and which bits of the tenant voice do you believe you want to engage most, and maybe have a special area of interest as a board member on, and therefore bring that back into board decision and sort of influencing cabinet decision making through the board. You know, the other bits of engagement is more through communication and information around progress being made around each of the high-rise blocks. So we're currently working with the Harold Wilson Court tenants to inform them about progress we're making around remediation. And so, you know, we plug into our main engagement mechanisms, but have some bespoke engagement mechanisms around high-rise safety, in particular in the first instance. And as we move through the programs, we'll broaden that to the housing types.
Yeah, it's just that I understand you've got concentrated communications with the residents of those high-rise blocks that are immediately affected by decisions that have been taken. But it's about as well hearing concerns from other tenants in other blocks at all times. So those concerns are being listened to at all times as well. That was concerning me, that you have this concentrated effort here, but here you may have a whole raft of tenants who are extremely concerned and who also need information and also need to be heard through this legislation. So it was how you're doing that at the same time.
Well, I have to confess that concern isn't coming through the communication channels.
Right.
So
Okay.
we haven't picked up any large areas of anxiety amongst others.
Right.
And actually, the tenants of the high-rise blocks are reasonably assured as well.
Yeah.
So, and as we move through the programs of inspection that Asad was referring to earlier, we'll get a better understanding of any safety issues that we might need to address. One of the things in terms of comms, and I'm not trying to state the obvious, but what we don't want to do is communicate too early if we don't have some solid answers and briefings to give to our tenants. Otherwise, we run the risk of alarming them. Okay. So we could write to all the low-rise tenants, couldn't we, and say, we've just, tendered a piece of work, we'll be communicating with you further, but that leaves too much unanswered. But that is all we could say at this stage. So we want to be able to give them a fuller explanation, and should they wish to then discuss with us and housing officers what the real issues are, should they be concerned, should they be anxious, should they move out, those sorts of things that can then be addressed, because we will have been able to properly brief the housing officers as well. I just think accurate information at the appropriate time is the kind of the underpinning principle for some of the building safety communications plan.
All right. Anybody got any other questions on these papers then? No? Okay. So that brings us to the meeting schedule. Our next public meeting will be on Tuesday, the 26th of October, and we have another one on the 10th of November and the 22nd of December. Okay, thank you everybody for joining the meeting this afternoon. That ends this session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.